The sun had not yet cleared the ridge when he came down the northern trail. A line of orange bruised the edge of the sky, pale and silent like a wound healing wrong. The desert, still clinging to the coolness of night, breathed slowly. Sagebrush curled in the faint breeze, and the buzzards on the fence posts watched him with indifferent patience. He rode without hurry, the kind of pace that told a story no one was asking to hear, the story of a man who had nowhere left to be, but kept moving anyway. His horse was lean, ribs showing under a coat of sweat-dulled hair. Its hooves struck the dry earth with dull rhythm, stirring little clouds of dust that hung briefly in the air. Like memory, he hadn't spoken in 2 days. The last voice he heard was his own, muttered into the dark like a confession he didn't expect to be forgiven. Ahead, the town waited, not with welcome, but with resignation. It had known men like him before, the kind who came for a day, left a body behind, and disappeared before the undertaker finished the pine box. A town built for survival, not for stories. He passed the crooked sign first. Bitter Run. Pop. 94. The numbers had been painted over so many times they no longer mattered. The saloon still leaned left, like it might fall if someone leaned too hard on the bar. The general store's windows were taped, not repaired. A piano played a single note again and again from somewhere inside, not as music, but as warning. He dismounted in front of the livery stable, tied the reins with a gesture born of habit, not thought. His boots hit the ground with a hollow thud. Dust clung to him like a second skin. He was the kind of man who didn't need to introduce himself, the kind you looked at once and looked away from it twice. Inside it smelled of sweat and iron and the faint rot of old hay. Horses shifted in their stalls, restless. Flies buzzed in lazy circles. That's when he saw her, just a shape at first, a stillness inside the stall shadows. Small, thin, too thin, eyes that didn't flinch, hands that didn't fidget. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. She didn't belong here, not in the way children don't belong to war. He was here to buy a horse, a better one that could take him deeper into nowhere. But when he left, the girl was behind him on the saddle, clutching a canvas satchel and a silence heavier than gunmetal. And far behind them, in a window above the sheriff's office, a curtain moved. Someone had seen. The secret hadn't been spoken yet, but it had begun to move, like thunder crawling over the mountains. They left Bitter Run before the sun had fully opened its eye on the horizon. The light was gold and gentle, but it did not warm. It only exposed. The girl sat behind him, her arms wrapped around the satchel more than around his waist. She leaned away slightly, not out of fear, but from the instinct of someone unused to closeness. Her dress was thin, torn at the hem, and dust clung to her like she'd been born of it. She never looked back, not once, not even when the first cries rose behind them, faint as dying birds. The horse was tired, not broken, but wary, like it knew too much of men and their hurry. It climbed the ridge with effort, hooves breaking small stones loose to rattle down the slope behind them. Each sound was sharper than it should have been. Every echo felt like a question. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The girl didn't ask. Whatever had tied them together in that town didn't need names or plans or trust. It was something older. Something that smelled like smoke and sounded like footsteps behind a closed door. Below them, the town shrank into dust and shadow. The crooked saloon, the leaning church, the jail with its busted roof, they all blurred into the same shade of brown. Somewhere, a gun was being loaded with slow, deliberate hands. Somewhere, a man had started a clock and written 2 names in a ledger. They rode into the waste. The road vanished after the first mile. From here on, it was scrubland, broken fences, and the skeletons of wagons left to rot beneath sun-scoured skies. Windmills turned with uneven groans, creaking like old bones. Ravens lifted off fence posts as they passed, circling once, then settling behind them, watching. By midday, the girl began to sway. He stopped beneath a bent cottonwood, the only shade for miles. The horse stood still. Its sides heaved. The man didn't move for a long while. He watched the horizon instead, one hand resting on the saddle horn, the other on the butt of the pistol he hadn't yet drawn. The girl sat in the dust, back to the tree. Her eyes were closed, but she wasn't asleep. Just conserving something. Energy, memory, maybe the will to keep going. The satchel rested in her lap like it had weight beyond its size. Canvas, dirt-smudged, the flap tied shut with fraying twine. It looked ordinary, but it wasn't. It was the reason men would follow, the reason they wouldn't stop, the reason she hadn't stayed. He knew better than to ask. He'd seen enough secrets die trying to speak. By dusk, the wind shifted, cooler now and coming from the north, the kind of wind that carried voices farther than they ought to go. He heard nothing, not yet. But something had changed. The silence was different now. It had a taste, like iron, like the pause before a gunshot. They rode again. The stars came out, and the land turned silver blue, hushed and infinite. Coyotes howled far off, not from hunger, but ritual. A rhythm older than towns, older than fences. He didn't look at the girl, but he could feel it, the fear she kept folded inside her like a letter she'd never open. And he knew whatever was in that bag would get them killed. Maybe not tonight, maybe not even soon. But the clock had started ticking the moment they left town, and no one ever outran time. By the third morning, the landscape had turned strange, not unfamiliar, but wrong. Hills that leaned a little too steep, trees that grew sideways from the rock, twisted like arthritic fingers. The trail, if it could still be called that, had narrowed to a suggestion, snaking through a dry wash where even vultures didn't fly. The man kept his eyes forward, but he saw everything. Animal tracks, deer mostly, but one set he didn't like. Too wide, too deep, left recently. Boots, heavy ones. Maybe 3 riders, maybe 4. Close enough to be trouble. Far enough to feel safe about it. For now. The girl still hadn't spoken. She hadn't even made a sound since they passed the rusted water tower at dusk the day before. Her breath was shallow, steady. She moved like someone trying not to exist. He understood. They made camp beneath an overhang of rock that curved out like a wave, frozen mid-crash. The horse was tethered in the scrub, its head low, chewing dry grass without interest. The fire was small, barely more than embers, and the smoke was thin, colorless, drifting up and away into the night like a prayer that didn't expect an answer. He sat with his back to the rock wall, hat low, watching the shadows crawl between the stones. His rifle lay across his knees, not drawn, not aimed, just present. She sat across from him, arms wrapped around the satchel, still clutching it, even in sleep, if she was asleep. The light from the fire made her face look older than it was, hard lines around eyes that should have belonged to someone twice her age. Grief does that. Silence, too. The man didn't close his eyes that night, not once. Because in the distance, far off, past the ridgeline where the land turned to ash, there had been smoke. A pillar of it, thick and black, rising fast and straight. Not a campfire, not a signal. A house burning. Or worse. Someone was behind them, close enough now to stop being careful, and burning things that didn't need to burn. He chewed on the thought like tobacco, slow and bitter. He didn't know what was in the girl's bag, only that men were willing to kill for it, and that she had chosen him for reasons he hadn't earned. He didn't ask why. Men like him didn't get answers, just bullets. And time. By midnight the fire had gone to coals. The stars were like old scars above them. The wind shifted again, not colder, just crueler. Carrying with it a new sound, horses, 4, maybe 5, moving slow, deliberate, no urgency, like they knew who they were following. He didn't wake the girl, he just stood, checked his rifle, and stared into the dark for a long time. Not afraid, not ready, just aware. Because some men die for gold, some men die for women, and some die without knowing why. He had the feeling he was walking toward the third kind. At sunrise, the sky was bloodless, a pale white expanse like bone polished smooth. The desert didn't stir, not even the wind rose. It was the kind of stillness that came before bad things. Not a warning, a certainty. They broke camp without a word. The girl moved like someone who had never expected to rest long. She didn't meet his eyes, and he didn't ask her to. The satchel was still pressed to her chest, though her arms looked weaker than the day before. The man watched the horizon as they rode. Not for direction, he already knew where they were headed, nowhere. But for movement, anything. A glint off metal, a dust trail, a bird startled into flight. He saw nothing, and that worried him more than if he'd seen everything. They passed a stagecoach, turned over, and stripped bare. Vultures scattered at their approach, slow to lift, bellies full. The wheels had been burned, the driver's bench riddled with holes. Not looters, not Apaches. This was methodical, quiet, done by men who didn't need trophies. The girl said nothing, just tightened her grip on the bag. The man dismounted, walked slowly to the coach. His boots crunched in the cinders. The smell was faint, not of death, but of things long dead. Inside the coach, there were no bodies. Just a single object on the floor. A silver button, clean, untarnished, still warm. He pocketed it without thinking. His face didn't change, but inside, something shifted. Back on the horse, they moved faster. The land narrowed as the trail dropped into a canyon, dry riverbed, walls too steep on either side. A bad place to be, a place someone might choose for an ambush. But they had no other way through, not without turning back, and that wasn't an option anymore. Midway through, he stopped. The girl tensed behind him. He listened. Nothing. Then, one sound. A rock. Shifted wrong. Not natural. He raised his hand, not to silence her. She was already silent, but to acknowledge what she had probably already sensed. They were not alone. On the canyon ridge, a figure appeared. Coat, snapping in the rising wind. Then another, and another. 4 in total. They stood without urgency, without motion, just watching. No shouts, no gunfire, just presence. Men without shadows. The kind that worked for no badge, no army, just the weight of a name whispered in dark corners, and paid in gold no bank would touch. The girl pressed closer against him. He felt it. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. She knew them. Maybe not their faces, but what they meant. He turned the horse slowly. No sudden moves. Just steady. The riders above didn't follow. They didn't need to. They knew where he was going. They wanted him to keep going, because this wasn't a chase. It was a shepherding, and they weren't hunters. They were witnesses. They rode until the sun had no heat left in it, just light, flat and colorless, like a lantern swinging low in the wind. The air had changed. Cooler now, but not kind. There was something in it, a stillness that scraped the lungs raw. Like the desert had exhaled and wasn't planning to breathe in again. Ahead lay Dry Fork. It wasn't a town, it wasn't even a place, just a crossing, a shallow bend where water used to run, back when rivers still remembered their purpose. Now it was a wound in the land, cracked mud, stones smooth as teeth, the ribcage of a mule half buried in dust. The man reined the horse to a stop at the ridge above it. Below, the fork stretched wide and dead. On the far side, the trail picked up again, faint, half swallowed by scrub. But it was there. So was something else. Boot prints, fresh, at least 6 sets. No horses, just men, moving slow, confident. The girl said nothing, but he felt her hand shift slightly against his back. not pulling him back, not pointing forward, just bracing, like someone about to take a blow they'd already taken before. He dismounted, scanned the basin below. Nothing moved, no wind, no birds, no sign of who left the tracks, or how long ago. But it didn't matter. Time didn't move the same way out here. It folded, doubled back, stretched thin. He led the horse down carefully, boots grinding against loose gravel. The girl didn't ask to be let down. She held tight, head bowed, bag between them like a pulse. Halfway across, the silence broke. One sound, metal on stone. He turned fast, rifle up, eyes narrowing against the glare. Nothing. Then another sound from the left, a low cough like a throat clearing. He spun again, too slow this time. From the ridge above, a figure appeared. Not one of the four from the canyon. This one was older, taller, face hidden behind dust goggles and a broad hat pulled low, coat long and dark, fluttering at the edges. No badge, no smile. He raised his hand, not in greeting, in permission. 3 other men rose behind the rocks, rifles at the ready. 2 on the left ridge, one behind them at the top of the trail they'd just come down. The girl didn't scream. She didn't move. The man didn't flinch. He simply shifted sideways, just enough to shield her. The figure on the ridge didn't speak, didn't shoot, just waited. This wasn't a robbery. It was a warning. You're being watched. You're being allowed for now. Slowly, the man lowered his rifle, tied it to the saddle, mounted again, and they kept moving. No shot followed them, no voice called after, but he felt it, like a hand pressing between his shoulders, cold and unseen. These men didn't want the bag. They wanted what the bag led to. And the man had the feeling that once they got close enough, they'd take it, and the girl, without needing to draw, because they were waiting for something, a signal or a name. Night fell without warning. No twilight, no soft fade, just sudden black, heavy and complete, like the stars had turned their backs on the earth. They made camp at the base of a rocky bluff, half sheltered by wind-carved stone. The fire was small again, shielded. The horse stood nearby, ears twitching at every sound the desert dared make. The man crouched low, hands busy with nothing, thoughts louder than anything in the canyon beyond. The girl sat across from him, unmoving. Her eyes reflected the firelight, but not the warmth. She looked like someone trying to disappear into her own bones. The satchel lay in her lap, still sealed, still sacred. The wind picked up after midnight, not wild, just constant, like something had started to whisper and forgotten how to stop. The man listened to it, not with fear, but with the kind of stillness only born from memory, from knowing. He'd heard that wind before, years ago, in another place, another life. He'd been younger, dumber, riding under another man's name. There had been gold, blood, a dead preacher, and a woman who kept a lantern burning in her window long after she knew he wasn't coming back. He'd broken a promise there, and now that wind was back, calling him to remember. The girl lay on her side now, back to the fire. Not asleep, not quite, just gone in a way that couldn't be reached with words. He watched her shoulders rise and fall, so thin, so still. He wondered what her name was. She hadn't said. Maybe she'd forgotten it herself. Maybe it had been taken, the way names are taken from graves no one visits. He thought of the lantern again. The woman who'd waited. How long did a light burn before hope turned to ash? The man didn't sleep. He hadn't really since Bitter Run. He sat with his back to the stone, rifle across his knees, eyes on the fire. Not for warmth, for anchor. Somewhere beyond the bluff, a coyote howled once, not a pack, just one. A lone voice calling into the dark, not expecting a reply. He understood that sound. Before dawn, he rose, tossed sand over the fire, cinched the saddle, and lifted the girl up without a word. She didn't resist. She didn't ask where they were going, because deep down, they both knew. They weren't going anywhere. They were being drawn, pulled by something just behind the horizon, a secret that had teeth and eyes, and a price neither of them had counted yet. The lantern was still burning somewhere, but not for him, not anymore. They reached the old cemetery by mid-morning. It wasn't on any map. No trail led to it. Just a slight rise in the land, barely more than a swelling of dust, and the broken stubs of wooden crosses, too weather-worn to stand straight. The ground was sunken in places, like something beneath had shifted, uneasy. No dates, no names, only the memory of the forgotten. The man stopped the horse at the edge of the field, let the silence settle. He didn't dismount. He didn't need to. The place spoke loud enough. The girl stirred behind him, lifting her head for the first time in hours. She looked out over the graves, expression unreadable. Not fear, not sorrow, recognition. This wasn't her first time here. The wind moved differently across this ground, low and circular, like it didn't know which way to go. Dust spiraled in loose, lazy loops. A scrap of ribbon, sun-bleached and fraying, danced from a nearby bush, tied to nothing, marking nothing. He led the horse forward slowly. The ground cracked beneath each step. Not loud, just final, like something inside the earth disapproved of the living. They reached the center of the field, where the largest cross stood. It leaned east, nailed together with rusted square heads, the top splintered by time or weather or hands that had wanted it broken. The girl slid off the horse without help. She walked forward, slow and stiff, until she reached the cross. Then she knelt. The man stayed back, watched. The satchel was still in her hands, still clutched like a lifeline. But now she untied it, for the first time since Bitter Run. Her fingers moved carefully, not with fear, but reverence. She pulled the flap back and removed a single item. A photograph, black and white, curled at the corners, water-damaged. She didn't hold it up, just laid it at the base of the cross. Then, from the satchel, she drew something else, small, metallic, wrapped in a torn piece of cloth. He couldn't see what it was, only that she placed it gently beside the photo, then knelt back, hands folded, head bowed. The wind died completely. No sound, no movement. Even the horse stood still, ears forward. Then, behind them, a new sound. Hooves. 6, maybe more, far off but not far enough. Coming slow. Casual, like they knew this was the place, like this was what they'd been waiting for. The man didn't move. The girl didn't rise. Whatever she'd left on that grave, it wasn't just memory. It was signal. An answer to a question someone had asked long ago and had waited too long to hear. The man's hand dropped to the pistol at his side, still holstered, still quiet, because some moments don't start with a gun. They end with one. They came out of the haze without urgency. 6 men, dust-colored coats, wide hats, movements slow, deliberate, like death come walking, but not in any hurry to reach its destination. Their horses didn't make a sound. The girl didn't look up. She stayed kneeling, hands folded in her lap, as if she'd already made peace with whatever came next. The man stepped forward just once, not to protect her, not to threaten, just to be seen. That was what men like these respected. Not talk, not fear, but presence. The riders fanned out as they approached, forming a loose half-circle around the graveyard's edge. Not close, just close enough to kill from. They didn't speak. One of them dismounted. Tall, thin, face like worn leather. His boots made no sound on the cracked earth as he walked forward, stopping only when he reached the cross where the girl knelt. He didn't look at her, just at what she'd left, the photograph and the object wrapped in cloth. He bent down, unwrapped it. A locket, silver, scorched at the edges, hinges twisted. Inside a picture of 2 girls, one maybe 12, the other younger. He stared at it for a long time. Then he turned to the man and nodded, not as thanks, not as threat, as confirmation. She'd done what she was told. She'd brought it here, the proof, the bait, the debt. The tall man said nothing, just stood, handed the locket to one of the others, and returned to his horse. But something had changed. They didn't leave. They stayed, waiting. The man felt it in his chest, that coldness that comes before a storm, not weather, reckoning. These men hadn't come for what was in the satchel. They hadn't come for the girl. They'd come for him. Because now they knew who he was and what he'd done years ago, before the war ended, before he stopped wearing the uniform that never fit right, before a church was burned and a safe was emptied and a man with a stitched cross on his hand bled out on consecrated ground. Some names weren't on wanted posters. Some debts weren't paid in coin. The girl rose slowly. She didn't speak, but her eyes met his now, and in them was something new. Not trust, not fear, acceptance. She knew now what he was, or maybe she always had. Behind them, the 6 riders turned their mounts as one, wheeling west toward the sun. They didn't draw, didn't shoot, but the message was clear. Follow. The grave had been opened. Now the road led into it. They rode in silence behind the 6. No dust rose from the hooves. The earth had gone too dry for that, like it no longer cared to keep secrets buried. The girl sat behind him as always, but her grip had changed. It was looser now, not from trust, but from resignation, like someone riding to a sentence already passed. The riders ahead did not look back. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They moved as one, each a shadow of the same intent, each man a limb of something larger, older, and far more dangerous than the guns on their hips. The sun climbed behind them, dull and heavy. It cast no warmth, only long, skeletal shadows that stretched across the plain like reaching hands. The man knew this part of the country. He'd buried a name here once, burned it out of every ledger, every rumor, every whispered story passed between drunks at the back of the dry saloons. He'd cut it out of himself like rot, but now it had found him, and it wanted him back. They passed the remains of a town just before noon. One street, 2 buildings half standing, the rest eaten by fire and wind and time. A church with no roof. A bell that hung sideways from its tower, cracked clean down the middle. He remembered this place, not its name. That was gone, erased. But he remembered the man they'd hung here, a man with a daughter, a safe, a secret, and a locket. The same locket now tucked into the coat of one of the riders ahead. He'd told himself it was necessary. That war made monsters of everyone, that God had turned his face by then, and all that mattered was surviving long enough to forget what you'd done. But you don't forget. Not when it comes looking for you in the shape of a 16-year-old girl and 6 men who don't cast shadows. The riders turned left off the trail. No road there, just rock and brush and a dry arroyo with bones sticking from its banks. The man followed, not because he had to, but because he knew the truth now. There was no road back, no way to outrun what was already in your blood. Beside the arroyo, they stopped. The lead rider dismounted, turned slowly. For the first time his eyes met the man's. They were colorless, not gray, not blue, just empty. The girl slid down from the saddle, walked forward, not toward the riders, toward the arroyo. She knelt again, this time not at a grave, at a hatch. Iron, half buried under stone and scrub. She brushed it clean like she'd done it before, like she'd known it was there, and she had, because this was the place. The man dismounted, moved closer. The riders didn't stop him. He saw the emblem on the hatch, a 7-pointed star, burned and blackened. It wasn't a vault, it wasn't a grave, it was a door, and now it was opening. The hatch opened with a long, low groan, metal grinding against rusted earth like something deep beneath had just stirred from sleep. Dust rolled out, thick and bitter. The smell that followed wasn't death. It was memory. Old, iron-heavy, like dried blood on sun-warmed stone. The girl didn't flinch. She stood and stepped down into the darkness. The man followed. No words, no hesitation. The riders remained above, still and silent, watching. The stairwell beneath was narrow, carved rock reinforced with beams long blackened by time. His boots echoed against the steps. Hers did not. She moved like she belonged there. The deeper they went, the colder it grew. Not natural cold. The kind of chill that comes from something sealed away too long. The kind that forgets the sun ever existed. At the bottom, a chamber, carved into the stone, small, round, and empty, except for the table, rough-hewn, square, covered in dust. On it, 3 things: a revolver, nickel-plated, loaded, a folded uniform, gray, with a blood-stained collar, and a single page from a ledger, torn and burnt at the edges. The man stopped. The girl stepped forward. She picked up the page, held it out to him. He took it. He didn't need to read it. He already knew what it was. A record, his record, from the days when he was someone else, when he wore that uniform, when he rode with men who'd sworn to die before they'd give up the map. And one of them had. Bled out on consecrated ground, after handing the locket to a preacher's daughter, after whispering a name, her name. He looked at the revolver. He looked at the girl. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't afraid, because this, all of it, wasn't about punishment. It was about choice. The ledger was the past. The gun was the price. And the girl was what was left of the truth. He reached down, took the revolver. The steel felt heavier than it should. Like it remembered, he didn't raise it, didn't speak, just walked to the far wall, placed it there gently, and left the uniform folded. The past would stay buried, but the cost, that would come later. He turned back to the girl, and she nodded once, as if to say, "You did what you had to. Now let's go." They climbed the stairs together. Above, the riders were already mounted, waiting, watching. But this time, as the man stepped into the sun, something in their eyes changed. Not mercy, not welcome, but recognition. He was no longer running. He had remembered, and now the game would shift. The secret was no longer hidden. It was alive and riding with him. Chapter 11, The Shape of a Cross. They rode north now, not because it was safer, but because north was where the trouble always waited. The riders no longer led. They followed, 2 behind, 2 to the flanks, 2 far out ahead, visible only as dust ghosts against the horizon. Their formation spoke one thing, escort, but not of honor, of containment. They weren't protecting him, they were watching him and her. The desert changed with every mile. The earth turned redder, harsher. The brush grew thin, then vanished. Stones outnumbered trees. The sky pressed lower. Days lost their edges. Time stretched as if the world had forgotten to move forward and was waiting for someone to force it. The girl rode in silence, sometimes beside him, sometimes just behind, eyes on the ground, face unreadable. But each night when they made camp, she took out the locket, not to open it, not to mourn, just to remember. She'd sit with it in her lap like a compass that no longer pointed north, but still told her where she didn't want to go. He kept his distance. He was afraid of her, though he'd never admit it. Not because she might blame him, but because she might not. They passed a dried riverbed 3 days out, bone-white stones picked clean by wind and years. In the center stood a tree, long dead, but still upright, branches like broken fingers. Something about it made him stop. He dismounted, walked slowly toward it. Carved into the trunk, shallow and raw, was a single shape, a cross, but not Christian. The wrong number of points. 7. He stared at it long enough to feel the weight in his chest begin to shift. This wasn't just the mark of a past he'd tried to forget. It was a warning, one he'd once left for someone else. And now it had circled back. The girl stepped beside him, looked up at the mark. Then, for the first time in days, she moved her hand toward his coat pocket. She pulled free the torn ledger page, held it up beside the cross. Same symbol, same slanted ink. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. He understood now. This wasn't about what he'd done back then. This was about what he'd buried and who had found it. They weren't alone on this trail. There were others looking for what he thought was long lost. Not gold, not justice, but a location. A place that didn't exist on any map, but had once been whispered between dying men and greedy preachers. A place tied to the seven-pointed star. And the girl, she wasn't just a witness. She was the map. S by dusk. No trail, no markers. Just endless blistered white. A land scrubbed clean by sun and silence, where even the wind sounded unsure of itself. The girl didn't complain. She never did. But something changed in her eyes as the salt stretched before them. Recognition again. Not of place, of weight, of knowing they were close. The 6 riders fanned out wide now, not guarding, searching. Their formation broke like wolves circling a scent, but always keeping the man and the girl in the center. The man adjusted his hat against the glare. His horse flinched beneath him, not from heat, but something deeper, instinctive. Horses know when the ground's wrong. They pressed on. Each hoof step left no mark. The crust beneath was too hard, too old, like walking on the bones of something long dead and better left unnamed. Night fell without ceremony. No sunset, just a dimming, like a lamp turned low behind thick glass. They made camp on a rise of rock just above the flat. No fire, no words, just the sound of wind brushing salt and the occasional creak of leather straps settling into silence. The girl unwrapped the locket again. This time, she opened it. The man watched from a distance, pretending not to. But he saw the way her fingers trembled, not with fear, but purpose. Inside, behind the picture, was something he hadn't noticed before. A piece of parchment, thin, cracked. She unfolded it with care. Even in the low light, he saw what it was. A map, not drawn with precision, no coordinates, just landmarks, symbols, and one, marked near the top, the same 7-pointed star. The riders saw it too. They didn't approach, didn't ask, but they knew. Whatever they had been waiting for, it was here now, and she was showing them the way. But it wasn't obedience, it was necessity, because the girl, for all her silence, all her weight, wasn't leading them to treasure. She was leading them to judgment. The man sat alone with his thoughts as the sky opened above, stars sharp and colorless, like shards of broken glass scattered across the dark. He remembered a night like this, 17 years earlier, same flats, same sky, different girl, and the shot that changed everything, the one he didn't take, and the man who did. They were heading to that place now, not to find something, to finish it. And if he was honest, part of him was ready. At dawn, the flats began to change. The white crust broke in veins, like cracks in porcelain. Thin lines first, then jagged black scars that widened with each mile. The ground beneath them groaned, not loud, but deep, as if the land itself resented being crossed. The girl rode with the map unfolded in her lap. She didn't look down at it anymore. She didn't need to. She remembered. The 6 riders closed in again, their distance shrinking. Their silence grew heavier. The kind of stillness men wore before violence, not rage, not chaos, just the cold calm of knowing. The man rode beside her. His eyes were fixed ahead, but his thoughts were turning inward, memory like a wound being picked open by wind and salt. Every ridge of land stirred some ghost. Then, on the 12th hour, she raised her hand, stopped. No words, no signal, just stillness. Before them, a rise in the salt, barely noticeable, a dome-shaped swell of land covered in sun-scorched rock. Nothing remarkable, no markings, no signs. But she dismounted. So did the riders. The man followed. She walked forward slowly, her boots crunching salt and gravel, until she reached the top of the dome. There, half buried under a flat sheet of stone, was a ring of iron. A hatch, just like before, but older, welded shut, scorched black around the seams. One of the riders stepped forward, the tall one, the leader. He knelt, drew a blade from his coat, and began cutting at the edge of the seal. It didn't take long, as if the thing had been waiting to open, as if someone had opened it before. The lid gave way with a sound like breath being drawn after too long underwater. Inside, a shaft, square cut, descending into darkness. Steps chiseled into the sides, narrow, crude, covered in ash. The girl looked to the man. Her face said what her voice never did. "You first." He nodded, climbed down. The air grew colder with each step, drier. The walls glistened with mineral deposits like old bones sweating under pressure. Then the stairs ended. He stood in a wide stone chamber. The walls bore carvings, not letters, not language, but symbols. 7-pointed stars, arrows, circles with lines through them. Ritual without explanation. The girl descended behind him. The riders followed. Together they moved into the next chamber. And there, in the center of the room, beneath a ceiling of soot-blackened rock, stood a man, alive, old, eyes white with blindness. He didn't flinch as they entered, didn't speak, but his head turned slightly at the sound of their boots, and a smile cracked across his face, slow, dry, like stone shifting in heat. The girl stepped forward, reached into her coat, removed the locket, opened it, and threw it at his feet. The man reached down, touched it with both hands, held it like something holy, something earned. Then he spoke. Just one word, a name, not hers, his. The blind man's smile grew. He knew the rider. He'd been waiting for him. Chapter 14. The Reckoning. The chamber didn't echo. The walls drank sound, as if they'd heard too much already. The blind man straightened, his bones cracked, dry as branches. His eyes never moved from where the rider stood, but they saw everything. He held the locket in his palm like it burned him. But he didn't let go. The girl remained still. So did the 6 riders. But their hands hovered near their coats now, not for threat, for reverence. As if what stood before them wasn't just a man, but a final truth. The rider took a step forward, then another. He hadn't spoken in days. There were no words left, nothing that could explain the road behind him or the road that now ended here. He stopped a few feet away from the blind man and dropped to one knee, not from submission, from gravity. The weight of it all, the girl, the vault, the locket, the name, had finally pressed him into the dust. The blind man knelt too, mirroring him. 2 shadows in a tomb, made for neither. Then the blind man extended the locket, held it toward the rider, and the rider didn't take it. Instead, he removed his hat, laid it on the floor between them, then unbuttoned the inside lining of the brim and pulled free a second piece of parchment, folded so thin it looked like skin. He laid it beside the locket. It bore the same symbols, same shape, same star. The blind man reached out, ran his fingers over the lines, and smiled again. But this time there was no cruelty in it, only peace. He nodded once, then let the locket fall to the ground. It landed softly. The girl stepped forward now. She reached into her coat and drew the revolver, the same one from the first chamber, nickel-plated, loaded. She looked at the rider. He met her gaze. No fear, no shame, only readiness. She handed it to him. He stood, took it gently, turned toward the blind man, but the blind man had already closed his eyes, already knelt still, already accepted. The rider aimed, and then lowered the gun, turned, and handed it back to the girl. Her face didn't change. She returned the weapon to her coat. Then she knelt before the blind man, whispered something no one else could hear. When she stood, he didn't move, didn't need to. What needed to be said had been said. What needed to die had already died. Above them, something shifted, faint and distant. Not footsteps, not voices, just time, moving on. They rode out just before dusk. No one spoke. The girl led now. Behind her, the man. Then the 6 riders, no longer circling, no longer watching, just moving forward like old wolves with no hunger left. The salt flats stretched out again, vast and empty, but they didn't feel the same. Something had shifted. Above, the wind moved across the land in slow sighs, carrying no heat, no threat, only the sound of something having passed. Not victory, not loss, just completion. The blind man did not follow. He stayed below, in that chamber where the locket lay open and forgotten, where maps were no longer needed and symbols finally rested in the dark. The rider didn't look back. He no longer needed to. Whatever bound him to that past, that vault, that name, that decision left unspoken 17 years ago, it had been burned out of him like sickness under a desert sun. But not everything had been taken. The girl remained, not as burden, as choice. She rode with shoulders squared, chin up, face turned toward a horizon that didn't promise peace, just space. And for now, that was enough. They reached the edge of the flats by nightfall. The land rose into foothills again. Dry brush returned, the smell of mesquite. A single hawk circled above, just one, like it had been waiting. The 6 riders reined in. The girl didn't stop. Neither did the man. One by one, the riders peeled away. Not dramatically, no farewells, just silence, like they had never been there at all. By the time the moon rose full, only 2 horses rode beneath it. The man and the girl. He glanced sideways once. She didn't return the look, but he didn't need her to. Somewhere in the saddlebag behind her, the revolver remained, still loaded, still cold. Somewhere in his coat, the parchment still pressed against his ribs like a scar. And between them, not trust, not yet. But the shape of it, the suggestion that maybe after all the blood and dust and silence, 2 people might still ride out of a story, not just alive, but willing. The stars blinked into place overhead, and the wind picked up behind them, soft and strange, like it remembered.